Right, so today's October the 10th. We are in Asheville. Actually, we're not in Asheville. We're in Mars Hill, the home of Peter Kendrick. And we're going to interview him today for the Gay Spirit Visions Oral History Project. I'm here with Randall Kumba. He's doing the technical stuff. And Peter, the first part has to do with sort of just a sketch of your general background, your family history and all that. So I'll mention these things and then I'll mention them again so you don't have to remember all of this stuff. Want you to briefly describe your family background, like where you were born, how your parents met, how you got to this part of the world, and whether you have siblings and if they're still alive, and some things like that. So why don't you start off with your family background? How did your parents meet, if you know that?
Yeah. My grandparents were all Lithuanian immigrants, and they lived in neighboring coal mining towns in Pennsylvania, Monroe City and Shenandoah. And my mother moved to New York City when she graduated high school because there were no jobs there, and my grandmother had lots of children, but there weren't that many left, and they all went to New York City then. And so she was there, and my father was...
Was your mother born in the United States?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And and so was my father, and he was in the army, and somehow he ended up in Brooklyn also. So both of them were in Brooklyn, and they went to the Annunciation, which is the Lithuanian Catholic Church in Brooklyn, and that's where they met, even though they lived in neighboring towns in Pennsylvania. Mm. And they got married during the war. And I have an older brother, John, and a younger brother, Paul, so we were John, Peter, and Paul, and a sister who was born much later, so she's 14 years younger than me, and her name is Carol.
Okay, and are they all still alive?
Yes.
Yeah. And
everyone lives on Long Island. My father died in 1964 or something like that, 1974 or somewhere around there. Everyone else lives on Long Island.
Okay. And when were you born?
1948 in Queens.
Okay. Okay. So, how did you get to Georgia? Or I mean, not Georgia, Asheville. Just tell us a little bit about your wanderings from. Were you living in Long Island when you left Long Island, or did they move there after you left for school?
No. My parents met in Brooklyn, which is on Long Island. And
oh, is it? I didn't know that.
And
okay.
They moved out to Suffolk County. We lived in Queens then when I was a kid, and then they moved further out from the city to Suffolk County, and I grew up there. Okay. And I spent almost all my life on Long Island. I think I'd only been off twice. Before college, and I went to Stony Brook, which is on Long Island, and then when I graduated, I started teaching on Long Island, and then I realized I was gay, and I was going to need to do something about it, and it didn't seem like that would be easy to do in my Catholic house. So I bought a house. So I never moved out to an apartment. I bought a house instead. And I owned a...
When you were what, 18? 19?
No.
20?
In my 20s.
Okay.
Yes, okay. In my early 20s.
All right.
And the day before I started teaching, my father and I were in a traffic accident. He was driving, and this car came out of a side street and hit the front corner of our Volkswagen van. And he was thrown out of the car and it ran over his leg and he eventually lost his leg. And he never worked again after that. And so I supported the family for a while with my first teaching job. And my father didn't earn a lot, so my first teaching middle school math teaching job already paid more than he earned.
Mm-hmm.
And my younger brother was still at home, and he was finishing college, so he finished college and all. And then years after, my father seemed to be getting better, and so that's when I decided to buy the house.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents helped me and supported me in doing that, and I bought this little house on Long Island near Lake Ronkonkoma. It was a converted summer home, and my younger brother helped me fix it up, so it was a fixer-upper too, and it was very nice. And then my father got cancer and he died, which happened shortly after I moved out, which would have made it harder if I had delayed. So I don't know if anything would have been the same.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was there then, after my father died, I really needed to come out. I really needed to find a partner in the world and fulfill my life. And I came across the Mother Earth News, and in the back of it they had positions and situations, and for a while they had day ads in it. So when I came in contact with that magazine, which is printed out of Hendersonville, North Carolina, out of all places,
Yeah.
I answered an ad in it, and the person, I really liked the person, but he was not responsive to me, and I don't really understand exactly what was going on there, but because I never did find out his total story.
Uh-huh.
But then I realized that, well, there are people out there and I could meet them, and I wasn't going to do it through a bar. I just realized it just wasn't going to work for me.
Uh-huh.
And so I wrote my own ad, and it was in the Mother Earth News in the February 1976 issue. And 100 people wrote to me.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was...
Was that a welcome thing, exciting thing, or was it overwhelming?
Right. Well, both.
Both.
And I would spend all my time teaching, grading papers, and writing letters to people. And I just knew this ad would work, so I would pour my heart into these letters and send them off. Yeah. And Rocco was one of them who wrote to me. And I wrote to all the ones that were close. So I would write to letters addressed from New York, Pennsylvania, and the neighboring states. Mm-hmm. And his was APO, New York. I had no idea what that meant. It meant Army Post Office, but he was actually in Germany. And he wrote a whole long, beautiful letter that somehow neglected to tell me where he was.
Okay.
And I wrote back to him, and then we had a 6 months correspondence. And in that time I met several people, including Sam Crawford, who came to the first gathering. Uh-huh. And Gabby Hayes wrote to me also from that ad, whom I later met. Wow. And a few other people that later were in the circle. Uh-huh. And I went down and I met Sam Crawford, who was married at the time to Patty, and that was real interesting. But it was my first trip to North Carolina, and I was like intrigued I just thought North Carolina was the most beautiful place. And he lived in Chapel Hill, and we went to the beach from there while I was visiting him. his wife
Mhm.
and then when Rocco wrote to me, that went on for a while, and I started to realize I'm not going to know. I'm not going to know who's the right person. That it's going to have to be the other person who figures it out.
Mhm.
And so when Rocco was getting out of the army, he called me from Germany and said he would be discharged at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And so I drove over there and I was looking for him. And we had sent pictures, which I will show you.
Okay.
And, but you can't tell, it's hard when you've never met somebody to try to recognize them from a picture.
Mhm.
So I was walking up and down the men being processed out, reading their name badges, looking at their face to see if I could find him. And I didn't, and so I was walking back to my car and we met in the parking lot. He knew immediately it was me.
Uh-huh.
And so he came home and he spent the week with me. And then he went back to Pennsylvania and told his parents he was moving to Long Island. He had decided that I was the person, and I wasn't 100% sure, but he was very sure, so that helped an awful lot. And of course, after I came to live with him, I knew what an extraordinary, wonderful person he was.
And y'all were in
Long Island.
Long Island for
We
a
were
while.
living.
Okay.
However, this whole process of coming out became clear to everybody that I was gay, including the students. Somehow they all figured it out. And they crucified me. They threw things at me, they said things, they wrote all over the desks. My life in the junior high school, where I was the department chair, well respected and doing really well, totally went to pieces. And I didn't know how to deal with it because I felt that I couldn't deny it. I felt that people were accusing me of something that was true, that could get me fired if I admitted to it, but I didn't necessarily feel like that I wanted to say that I wasn't that. It didn't feel authentic. I felt like I'd be lying to myself. And I didn't know exactly how to handle it, so I didn't answer at all. And that made it much worse, and I eventually quit. So I taught there 8.5 years, and at the end of that, I wrote lesson plans for the last few months, and I quit. And Rocco, by that point, had been living with me, and he witnessed this whole thing, and I would come home totally devastated, like a zombie, out of what I'd been through today.
Was that the worst time of your whole career?
Oh,
That
sure.
period? Yeah.
And he would just hold me,
Yeah.
and I knew I made the right bargain.
Mm.
I didn't need that as much as I wanted him. So,
How was this working with your family? You and Rocco and your, what was that real super gradual or?
well, when I wrote the ad, I had total faith for some reason that this was going to be successful. So I felt like there's going to be a man living with me, so I needed to tell my mother. So I told my mother I wanted to talk to her and took a day off and went to see her. And I told her I was gay. And then I told her that I was, like advertising in an international magazine, which was probably not the best thing to do. I mean, that was a lot for her to take at once.
Yeah.
But she was good about it, and she says, "Why didn't you tell your father?" And I thought that was like really interesting for her to say. And because she says he would have been so understanding, and I think she's right. I think he would have been, but I wasn't ready to when he was alive, and somehow his dying pushed it all to the surface, and so I never did.
What about your brother and sisters? When did they learn about this? Did she tell them that, or did you? Or you remember?
I don't think I ever told my brothers. I just let them figure it out. And my mother told my sister, whom did not have a really positive reaction, which strained everything for a while, because she and I think I was the closest brother to her. I mean, I just adored having this little girl there who was like almost my own, and I loved babysitting her and doing everything with her, and I think she thought of me as special, and this was difficult for her. But my family is very New York, and it's sort of like, you do your own thing, just don't bother me with it.
Okay. I never think of you as a New Yorker, but you are one, that's right. Okay, so you quit your job and what
Rocco
came
and
next?
I then decided to explore the country and to figure out where we wanted to live. And we had this pamphlet called West Virginia is Mother Country, and we were going to go there and figure out. So we explored all of West Virginia, and we're not exactly thrilled. It just looked like it was totally torn up. And then we explored parts of Pennsylvania and where he was from, and I knew I didn't want that, because when we were driving through Pennsylvania, he would say, "Move over."
Yeah.
Because we were in a pickup truck, and I would sit right next to him. When we got near his hometown, everything was different. I thought, I don't want to live anywhere around here. And then we explored upstate New York, and we found a perfect property outside of Albany. But the weather scared me, and as it got colder, I realized, oh no.
Yeah.
So we were exploring in the southern tier of New York near Elmira in the winter, and the snow blew under the door. And at the motel we were in, I told Rocco, God told me we're supposed to go to the carol. And so we did, and we went down and we explored then around Dale Hollow Lake, because we thought that might be the place, and that's in between Kentucky and Tennessee. And when we finally got there, it was like in August or something, and it was like a blast furnace. It was so hot, and I thought it was kind of neat and interesting, and Rocco sort of wilted and was semi-conscious. And so that wasn't exactly going to work. But when I actually did quit, we went to a natural healing seminar in Arizona.
Gosh, y'all put a lot of miles on this truck. You were in a truck?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, actually, we did it with other people. So we met up with them. We left our truck in Cochranville, Pennsylvania, met up with other people, and drove out in another pickup truck there.
Oh.
And this was outside of Tucson, at a camp there, and
Are we talking early 70s here, or mid 70s?
this was January 1978.
Late 70s. Okay.
Yeah, and
It was a retreat?
It was a retreat on natural
conference.
healing and
Okay.
that kind of living, and it was vegetarian and vegan probably, and raw food, and Dr. Christopher there, who was a major herbal healer, and other people, and we learned foot massage and everything. And almost by the time this 2-week seminar was over, everybody was sick.
Oh dear. Oh no.
And Rocco Carver really sick. So we ended up flying back to Philadelphia, which was in the middle of a snowstorm. And then we were trapped in Philadelphia for days, and we had an adventure getting to our truck 60 miles outside of that city in the snowstorm and everything to get back to Long Island. But on our way there, going to that, we happened to go through Western North Carolina, and we got as far as Spruce Pine. We never got all the way to Asheville before we turned right and went across Tennessee. And we loved that area. We really liked Western North Carolina. So when nowhere else worked, we felt like that was the place to go. So we decided
After the snow had stopped.
after we were exploring the country, we remembered this, and we decided to pack up everything we owned and move to Asheville, North Carolina, even though we had never been here, we didn't know anyone here, and we were crazy. And we did that. So we had the biggest U-Haul there was, and we went to Asheville.
And you sold your house?
I had my house on the market.
Okay. Okay.
I might have sold it by that point already, and we just left with the money and the possessions and everything. And we ended up in Montford. We went to the university to look at the bulletin board to find places to go, and someone said there was a place nearby that she was renting with a house next door, so we rented that house for $60 a month, and we were in Montford in the beginning there. And that whole area became like home, because we lived in all different places from there. The jobs I had were all right around there in Asheville.
Were you meeting gay people?
There weren't that many yet that week. We didn't come across very many in the beginning. So we found, I was excited still about coming to North Carolina, but Asheville wasn't Asheville like it is now. Asheville was
sleepy town.
a very southern town. So I got a job as a waiter, and Rocco started exploring to where we wanted country property. We were still in contact with a few other people whom had written to me. Actually, Rocco helped me organize all of that.
Oh, really?
He was incredible.
Oh.
And one of them was John Jones, who lived in Chicago, whom I had met and had a crush on. And he said he wanted to do this also. So he came down to visit Asheville, and while he was here, Sam Crawford, who I'd met earlier, wrote to me and said Michael Wilson was ready to sell Running Water, and he had been to one gathering at it, and that we should check this property out. So John Jones and Rocco and several other gay men who I'd met, actually through a restaurant job, went out to check out Running Water, and we met Ron Lamb there.
Okay, and tell me again where Running Water is.
Running Water is 60 miles from Asheville to the northwest in Mitchell County, off on a feeding ridge of Roan Mountain.
Okay. In North Carolina.
In North Carolina, not far from the Tennessee border.
Okay. And Michael was living there? and he wanted to sell it?
Michael had lived there, and I think had already moved on to Atlanta, or he was not in the area when he was selling it. He was not on the property.
Okay.
Because our negotiations with him were all through the phone at that point
Mm-hmm.
in order to buy it from him.
Okay.
Which we together could come up with all of the funds to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to actually buy this outright by what I had and Rocco shared with me, and what Ron Lamb had, and a little bit that John had. And in order to keep track of our investment, we formed a for-profit corporation and issued ourselves stock and for what we had invested, and bought the property in the name of the corporation, which was Stepping Stone Incorporated, which John Jones came up with the name for, out of a dream he had.
Uh-huh.
And so we negotiated with Michael Wilson to buy that property, and we closed on September 21st, 1979, in a lawyer's office in Spruce Pine, and then drove to the property, which had a gathering going because Michael Wilson had started the gatherings the previous year.
And this is the equinox time. Right?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And
You came to a property where people were doing things on
yes,
it. Okay, and it no longer belonged to Michael; it belonged to you
right,
and y'all.
right. But it was an incredible homecoming to come to that property on that day. It was like being welcomed by the family you always wanted.
Wow, wonderful.
Yes.
Wow. And do you remember who was there? I mean, are there people that you still know who were there, or are they not?
Raven Wolf Dancer.
Was there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably Franklin Abbott.
Uh-huh.
Milo probably from Short Mountain.
Mm.
And probably Gabby Hayes.
Okay.
I don't know because there were gatherings after that and they all went into my mind. So.
Okay.
But I do remember coming home. It rained hard that day, and there was just a light drizzle coming down on that, and it was just so magical.
Oh, nice. And you had met Ron Howe?
At Running Water, when we went up to look at the property,
Okay.
he was there. He had come across from San Francisco where he was living. He's originally from Greensboro, and he felt it was time he did this thing himself.
Uh-huh.
And right from the beginning, Ron was organized and on target and helpful in making everything happen.
Uh-huh. Okay. So y'all moved in there, and how long were you there? I mean, what's that story?
Well, that's...
So it belonged to the corporation, and were you all living on the property, or just some of you?
Well, as it turned out, when we bought the property, it took every penny we had, I think, from just about all of us. And we had very little, and we weren't set up to winter there. So we closed on the property, we had the gathering, and we packed up everything we owned, and we moved to Florida for the winter to make money. And someone else who had written to me was Ernie Lockwood, who was an older man, and he was like Mother. So, and he had this apartment in Tampa, and the one next to him was available. So he arranged to rent that apartment. These were side-by-side apartments in this house in Tampa. And we all went down, and he had several other people living with him also. And we inhabited these two apartments, and we all got jobs, and it worked. We made money.
Right.
And while we were there, he wanted us all to be like one big family, so it had these like closets with glass doors in the living room that were back to back. So he took out the wall between the closets, and there was a way to get from one to the other. So it was a huge, actually real Tales of the City adventure, living there with all these guys in these apartments while we worked. And I worked as a waiter in a natural foods restaurant where Rocco got a job as a chef. Ron was a switchboard operator, kind of like Lily Tomlin.
Yeah. Gosh. Okay. So you were there till you saved up enough money to go back?
Right, till about April, and we came back then to Running Water. And then at Running Water, Rocco immediately fell into a pattern of taking care of the gardens, figuring out what we needed to do for firewood and everything else, and he was the mainstay on having our operation work for us. Ron was the mainstay on the social networking and the how we used that to make money, which turned out to be gatherings, and then the taking in of RFD, which we published out of that place for a while. And John worked on RFD very artistically. He was a graphic artist, and he was excellent.
You weren't working at UNCA, were you?
No.
Okay.
But I continued to need it to have money, and even though the thing I did most there was building projects, reconstructing the house to fit our needs and stuff and all. And
were y'all planning to spend the next winter there, or to go away again?
Well, no, we were planning to stay at that point.
Okay.
And it turned out that Ron did go away. I think he went to Charlotte to earn money that following winter. Rocco and I stayed, and it was an idyllic winter. And I'll always remember that, because it was hard for me, because it wasn't suburban Long Island in the least.
No.
It didn't have indoor plumbing, and it didn't have an enclosed outhouse, and but it was, Rocco could just be so secure on how we handled everything. It was like, oh, yeah, we could do this, and it was wonderful. I remember once, at this point though, Michael Wilson moved to Montford, and he owned a house on Montford, and I think John Jones spent the winter in that house, and one day we were having this snowstorm, and Michael and John and a couple other guys showed up, and it was like, oh, we had a party, and she's like, how did you ever get here in all of this weather? And they said, what are you talking about? It all starts at the bottom of the mountain, half a mile from you.
Oh.
But we never knew.
You thought the whole world was wrapped up in snow.
But that's the way our life was. It was very enclosed that winter that we were there.
Uh-huh.
After that, though, I spent a lot of time in Nashville because I kept going back to make money. And then I came back once again and spent some time there. But the next time I went back to Asheville, I never came back to live there, because trying to set up an apartment and pay deposits and all that was so much of a hassle. I couldn't let it go. I wasn't making that much money waiting tables and doing what I was doing in Asheville. So I pretty much found inexpensive places to stay, and I lived in Michael Wilson's house, which was a trip to Montford.
Yeah.
And Rocco spent a lot of time there, so we were separated a bit during those years.
So what was the next development in the running water story. Did y'all? I mean, fast forward to leaving there, or did you realize that you were going to have to stay in Asheville indefinitely?
I pretty much did.
Okay.
Because I tried every which way to get a job when I was up in Mitchell County,
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't hire me, and for good reason. I couldn't speak their language. I never understood what people said to me.
Okay. Oh God.
So, but I applied for jobs that I was better qualified for, and they went vacant before they hired me.
Okay. All right.
So I realized that wasn't going to work for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent time in Asheville, and I worked as a waiter, and then I worked as a psychiatric aide at Highland Hospital.
Mm-hmm. So did y'all continue to have gatherings?
Yes, the gathering continued whether I was there, and John was seldom there.
Uh-huh.
Rocco was there a lot with Ron, but the gatherings continued, and
RFD continued.
Okay. And Rocky and Ron got along okay. He found Ron's energy more frenetic than he actually.
Yeah. Could have been different.
Right, but he was okay.
Yeah. Okay, and how was Ron making money then? Do you remember how he was? Was he living out there full time? Or was he?
Yeah, he was,
okay.
basically.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Ron was so creative. I can't remember
Okay.
what he did and how he did it.
Okay. So when did running water stop being what it was? How did y'all move to Asheville?
There came a point where
Was Michael Wilson part of it then, or he was out of it by then?
he was out of.
He went to gatherings maybe, but
Right, but he was not part of that, except that he had so many connections with people and us, and all. So I mean, there was like a continuation, but he was not part of the actual decision process on the properties.
Okay.
Like that.
Okay. And he was living in the Montford at that point.
Right.
Okay.
He was.
Okay. So.
And there came a point though where the separation was difficult for me with Rocco. And I arranged for he and I and my mother, who I somehow talked into going to an ARE seminar on psychic guidance. Because I figured he'd go get psychic guidance and they'd tell him to come back to me.
Okay. I get it. Yeah.
So we all...
Is that what worked out?
No.
No.
Of course not.
Oh, I see.
So we all went, and
Was that in Asheville?
it was in Virginia Beach, where ARE is located.
Oh, okay, okay.
Before we bought running water, when we lived in Asheville, we had an ARE study group at our home, Rocco and I, and people were into that at the time. And so we went to this gathering, and we got the guidance and all, and came back, because you had several psychic readings there, and you did your own processes on figuring out things. And he went back to running water, and I went back to Asheville to my job and all. And I remember spending 3 days crying, thinking, he's not coming back to me. And I don't know how I could make a living there for us. But for somehow he got a staph infection at running water that practically went systemic, and he got really sick, and he needed to come back just to get better, and he did, and he never left. So that's how we both ended up in Asheville.
Okay.
And then Ron lived there. The gatherings went on, and then we went to the 10-year gathering, and I met up, because I didn't attend all the gatherings for an interim there, and the reconnection was great, especially with Raven. And then Raven came to visit, and he was at this house, and Ron came to visit that time, and Ron was ready to move on. And so Raven said, when the gatherings are ending, we've got to go on to the next step with everyone. This circle that was created at Running Water, that was happening at these gatherings, needed to come to fruition with what it was going to do. Raven was a real visionary in that way. And so he wanted to do the conference. And so that was the beginning of it. But that all happened in this house, actually, that he said he wanted this to happen. And
I remember coming up here with him to have some sort of meeting about this, but I don't know if it was the first one or the second one, or was there more than one where people came here to talk about what to do next? Yeah. Okay.
And then there was also, Raven was involved with Peter Bear Walks, and had the sweat lodge ceremonies at Nani's property, and then we had them here, and he gave the ceremony to Rocco. So Rocco was a pipe carrier who was able to do the sweat lodge from Peter Bear Walks. So Ron and I then explored where to have these gatherings.
Had y'all dissolved Stepping Stone by then?
No.
No.
Nor had we sold Running Water. We just sort of closed it and had other people living there. And I think Ron could tell you much more about that in more detail.
Okay.
Because he was much more involved in that. But some of that is our darkest episode about what went wrong in this period where we all personally abandoned caretaking it ourselves, and it didn't go well with leaving it to people who were not connected to this group. And but we hadn't totally sold it. That didn't happen until later on.
Okay. So you and Ron were looking around for where to have the retreat?
Right. And we drove all over western North Carolina looking at campground type setups that had lodging and a place to eat and a place to hold meetings and all of that, so that the gathering wouldn't be so centered on, because this was Raven's idea, that the gathering shouldn't be so centered on just the housekeeping of getting everybody's needs taken care of, the gatherings were at Running Water and other places like Short Mountain, but it would be more on the program, that we could actually put all of our time and energy into creating the program. And so that's what we were looking for. And we would go to places and they would be somewhat interested, because what we were interested in was like the fall equinox, which would have been at the end of the season, when these places were ready to close. They could still extend it and make money, and we would be running it and it wouldn't be in the way. And so they were all interested until they heard who we were and what we wanted to do. And then they were suddenly totally booked. Until we got to the Unitarian Universalist Center of the Mountain. And when when they heard it, they said, "Oh, we've been wanting to do this for years and we just don't know how." So they were enthusiastic and welcoming of us from the very beginning, and they were the only place that was in all that we looked. So that's how we ended up in Highlands. And the first gathering, Raven had it in his mind that we needed Harry Hay and John Burnside there, who were, of course, living in California at the time. And this was all like low budget, no budget sort of thing. And we were wondering how we would ever do this, getting them there. And what happened was that I noticed at UNCA that they had this program where they would bring in speakers, and you could get it on the university program board to have speakers from the outside come. So I thought, you know, he has a big enough name that he could probably pull this. So I asked a gay man in the English department to help me write this grant, and this guy's name was David Hopes, who was actually wonderful.
Yeah.
And he helped me write the grant to the university program board to get Harry Hay here. And they went for it. So they actually paid for his airfare out to UNCA where he would give a talk. And we made up this topic for Harry to talk about, which had to do with the contribution of gay men to society and all. And Harry Hay took this really seriously. And he came up with some original thoughts. I hope that talk is still...
It is. It's been archived.
Oh,
and,
good.
Somebody has a transcript of all of the keynote speeches.
Yes, in the beginning, the keynote of this talk and others were taped and were given to the math department secretary, who was a secret ally of mine, and she would dictate them. She would type them all out. And she would not understand everything in it, so she had to get some help on ideas and words that weren't quite clear to her. But she was absolutely marvelous, and her name is Judy LaFay, and she's still friends.
Wonderful. I didn't know that. Oh, that's great.
Fact,
I didn't know that David Hopes was involved in that Harry Hay shenanigans either. That's great to know that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so that got Harry and John out here. So they were here staying at this house before the first conference, and Raven came out here. So we had a house full. And he was here for several days, and one of the days we had a picnic up on the top of the hill, and I had made all these lavender flags and things, and we put everything in a garden wet cart and rode it up the hill there and set everything up. It just felt like a Fellini movie. And so that is just a wonderful memory back then. And Harry and John were just so great and gracious while they were here. And then the day to go to the first conference came, and we left from this house, and there was a caravan of cars for all the people going. And I remember that morning, I put on all of these Stevie Wonder songs, and we were just all dancing around, getting ready and going. And we left, and there was a huge traffic jam that day, and it took hours and hours and hours to get from here to the mountain, because there was like a 20-car pileup on one of those highways out there getting to the mountain because of the fog, dense fog that happens around here. So we finally all got there, but that was a trip.
Ordeal. Okay, so now back up a little bit. You were you said this house, but I didn't hear the part where you found this house and you got a job at UNCA and all that. When did?
Oh, that happened after Rocco came back to live with me in Asheville, and I was renting at Montford and had a job at Highland Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I was doing, which was steady, and I was making money. And we went to ARE and we did that. We came back and we were both there. And there was an ad in the newspaper for the job at UNCA, because I was like actively looking. And I said to him, this job is perfect for me. And he said, well then, you could have it. And I went and applied for it and went back for several interviews and convinced them that I was the person to do this job.
Mm-hmm.
And they hired me, and it was only part-time work, but they hired me and I worked it into a full-time position. Mm-hmm. And got on at the university. Okay.
And then y'all started looking for a place.
And as soon as I got hired the new full-time, I wanted us to buy a house, so we were really actively looking when they were deciding to hire me. Mm-hmm. And we found this property through a real estate, and so when I got the job, we bought the property and we moved in here on July 4th, 1985, and I became full-time at UNCA in August of 1985. So right from the beginning, yeah, we wanted to use the money to pay mortgage, not rent.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, and so eventually, but maybe after the first conference, the stepping stone thing was dismantled, or was it before the conference, or do you know? I can ask Ron that too.
You got my recollection is that we sold running water somewhere in the 90s, which means that it was after we had already started the conferences and all of that we finally decided that we weren't going back and we needed to move on and do something with the property.
Okay. Do you have any, I know that for me all the conferences mush together and I can't separate them out, but do you remember anything about the first conference besides this traffic jam and all of that? Well, just talk a little bit about what you do remember that. Were you nervous about whether it would work? And
right, and the first conference, when we were doing this, we didn't know there would ever be a second conference. We were doing this to see how it would work.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was a radical thing to do because it was so organized, and that was like anti-fairy. And so, in fact, I later learned that we were called the Republican National Conference by York Mountain. So,
right. That didn't change. That sentiment didn't ever change.
Because it was, I mean, we were interested in the program and having structure and all of that, and that wasn't done. That was just hadn't been tried from the perspective of the people who were participating in running water and elsewhere. And I understand that. But at the same time, remarkable things happened right from the start because we were organized. We were also in fear at the first conference that we were going to be investigated by federal authorities, and we felt that Short Mountain itself was vulnerable and that they had some scare of being investigated,
or infiltrated.
Yes, and so during the first conference, one of the things I was supposed to do was give a talk and stare everybody in the eye and say, if you are here representing the CIA or FBI or some other organization, we're asking you to admit it right now. And I remember Gary Kaufman ribbing me on this later on. Being the fairy Nazi.
Yeah, that was your job. Well, so you had spent some time with Harry before the conference.
Mhm.
So the conference was not the first time you had met him or
No,
whatever.
but it was only during this, when he came here to stay,
Uh-huh.
that I met him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I remember Raven was doing all the arrangements. Raven had met Harry and John, and he knew them, and he felt confident that they should be here, and they would, and all of that. But he says, you have to talk to them over the phone. And it's like, me? I'm not, how do I know? I don't know what I'm going to say. So I remember talking to him over the phone and trying to be hospitable and understanding him and being myself, and I giggled and everything. And then later on, when he was here, we were talking and I giggled, and he says, that's the giggle that brought us 2,000 miles.
Well, there you go. So, what else happened at that conference that you can remember? Was it gratifying for you? Did you feel like it had been a success?
Yes, right from the start they did feel like they were a success. And what did feel like it was a success is that the heart circles worked so totally well. And that people got to share, and there was that bond and that communion and that feeling that happens in them that is like nothing you normally experience in life, in its intensity. And that was there. And it was there even more so than it had been at the Running Water gatherings.
Interesting. Okay. Do you know where the idea to do a heart circle came from? Was that a ritual at Running Water or at Short Mountain? That had come from somewhere else, right? I mean,
well, that I don't know, because I only know what we did. And right from the beginning of gatherings at Running Water, that was the major ceremony, was the heart circle.
Okay.
And I don't know where it came from, and truthfully, I've never been to Short Mountain.
Okay. Do you remember because I don't, whether the small groups were at the first conference, if we had small groups then, or if that came later on, where we broke down into small?
I am fairly certain we did not.
Okay.
At the first conference. I think that was later on when we realized that I think like the first conference was around 80 people, but when it started to get any bigger than that, we realized that it would help to have a more intimate group to talk with, and that we wouldn't have extensively long heart circles that way.
The marathon.
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember whether there were people that you were hoping to come to the conference that weren't able to come or couldn't afford to come or didn't come for whatever reason, that you were really sad that they didn't come that first time? Or was everybody pretty much in your network showed up that
I don't
that
think we
first
gave
conference?
that much thought. I think what we thought was that the right people would be there, and that I remember I worked on scholarships and rides and stuff like that, and we were trying to coordinate to make sure that anyone who wanted to get there could get there one way or another, either physically get the ride or somehow get the support to get there. Although that was still difficult at that time because we were all just, eking this out of nothing, just about.
Yeah.
And the mountain was giving us their deal, but they wanted to make their money too, and it turned out that, and in the end, was valuable to them also.
Do you remember anything about how it was decided there would be another conference, or how the energy at the end of the conference, which I imagine was wonderful and positive and all that, how that translated into, well, let's do another one, or, I mean, was there a commitment beyond that first conference as far as the contract went, or was it
Oh,
just?
no,
Okay.
no, there was no commitment beyond that one conference
Okay.
when we first signed up with the mountain.
Uh-huh.
However, after the conference was over, it somehow was very clear that there was the interest to do more.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure Raven was right on top of that and keeping that energy going. And also Raven had a list in his mind of the dynamic people in the gay movement at that time who we felt really needed to be spiritual advisors to us. And I think that second conference was James Brock,
Mhm.
whom he was very much saying should come. I would say that was probably my favorite.
Why? Why do you
I
say that?
thought what James had to say was so heartfelt and so poignant that I remember just being at every one of his talks and being totally moved to tears by just the heart of this man,
Mhm.
sharing things, and just the way he would say things like, in talking about sexuality, he says, your body is a temple. Visit each other's temples and worship and enjoy each other.
Mhm.
And the way he put all of that together and all, it was like, it was everywhere we meant to come from, just totally right out there with total heart. So I was really blown away by him. He's somebody whom I didn't know anything about before he arrived at the conference.
Okay. And was Bear Walks the third guy? The third? When did Bear Walks come?
Bear Walks?
Was he from the first?
Bear Walks was never in the conference. He was just
Okay.
in the circle of support
Oh.
that made up the people who organized the conference.
Okay.
Peter Bear Walks is a straight man as
Yeah.
far as I know.
Right. I thought he was the keynote one of the times, but no, he just came and did his thing.
Yeah, he just came and worked with all of us
Okay.
who were organizing it.
Okay.
As mostly Raven's connection.
Mhm.
And I remember Tom Spanbauer being extraordinary too at the early conference that he came to. And I remember him saying that he never saw himself as a spiritual leader. But boy, did he assume that role.
Mhm. Yeah. When we interview people, a lot of them remember that conference as their favorite one that he was at. Okay. All right. If you can talk a little bit about, because you were there from the beginning, your opinion or the way you perceive the arc of GSV's evolution, how it was different in the middle than it is now, or how it's different now than it was at the beginning. Just whatever observations you can remember having about how that thing that we didn't know was going to happen a second time, it just kept on going. And how is how do you think it's changed over the years? Or is it the same?
I I think it's grown and evolved and fulfilled its mission extraordinarily well, in that we were just trying to figure things out and do things in the beginning. And people have built on those ideas and taken them further and made everything better.
Mhm.
I think that it's fulfilling itself and fulfilling its mission extraordinarily well. I feel that what we started was rudimentary, and what has become out of it is sophisticated.
Mhm. Okay. When was the last conference you went to?
I visited the 25-year one.
Mm-hmm. The 20th
20th.
and the 25th, or
Yeah, both.
both? Okay. Okay. All right. So anything else about how it's morphed or changed, or for you, the role that it played in your life, was it a central thing for a long time and then not so much, or do you not think in those categories, or how do you relate to GSV now versus the way you did for the first
When, during the 90s, from 1990 to about 1996, the conference was the highlight of every year.
Mhm.
And the biggest deal for me. And I didn't think I would ever miss. And then I got the flu really bad in the middle of the 90s, and I did not make a conference. And I found that I would live anyway.
Right. Exactly what you're talking about.
And so, and my life here I had my own projects here. A lot of what was happening in Atlanta. Participating in the organization when it was happening in Atlanta, when I was here, before the internet was truly so pervasive in our lives, meant traveling a lot that was difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
I was never really wealthy. Everything always had to be done low budget, so I realized I could let it go and concentrate on my life, and that the conference was doing just fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay.
However, I will say that after retiring from the job where I taught for over 30 years and created the program at the university that I directed for that time and established it, that I think of GSV as far more significant contribution
Mhm.
and a piece of my life
Mhm.
than that job.
Uh-huh. Okay. Excuse me while I try to figure out where we are here. Would you say that I mean, is it accurate in your case to say that the GSV network overlaps with your other networks that you, as far as gay men go, that it was a big deal, or it was a separate compartment from the people that you know in Asheville, or most of the people you feel close to here, it's all the same mush, the same harass?
Yeah,
sort of.
I feel that way. Because I don't know who's been to a conference and who's not, who's really in GSV.
Yeah.
But most of the men I know here are of the same ilk anyway.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Is there any way to talk about how GSV, as opposed to other things that you've explored, contributed to your spiritual, journey, or is it all mushed up together in your own mind, or is there something unique about GSV that was just due to that, rather than all the other things that you may have been exploring along with that or before then, or is it just consistent with all the rest of it, sort of?
Before I met Rocco, while I was answering all my letters, I did ask in New York, which was one of those California movements, Earhart training seminars, and it's about taking responsibility for your life and creating your life and not giving yourself excuses for how you didn't create your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it significant. And when Rocco and I got together, I encouraged him to take it, and I took the next level, which was bringing us to community level.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that the philosophy there is helpful in that it empowered you to take control of your life and your energy and how you use it, and be clear on it.
Mm-hmm.
GSV does that to a certain extent, though, but it's not so heavy on the philosophy, but it's much more attuned to the nourishment of being in a community that actually totally unconditionally accepts you and loves you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a rare thing. You could do all of these New Age philosophy things, but to get to the point where you actually feel so embraced is really unique. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what GSV really offers. And when you come away from a conference and you have to re-enter life, that is the part that's so hard, is because you've been in that embrace, and it's like, when it's not the same, it's, you notice.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that is a shift that seldom happens even in New Age workshops.
Yeah, right. Okay. How does Rocco fit into the GSV story?
He was supportive of me in the beginning, and then he was active in doing things in it as we went on. I remember he gave a talk at the Open Amphitheater one year, where he talked about Native American spirituality and how it ties into everything, and what the Sweat Lodge was about and all of that. And so Rocco was kind of a spiritual advisor and an integral part of the network. When Raven said we needed Andrew Raymer at the conference, right at the beginning, Rocco was going to New York City for some reason that I cannot remember, for some conference or something. And Andrew Raymer was going to be there, so Rocco was the first person that Andrew met within our group in order to convince him to come to the conference. And Rocco was the right energy to do that.
Oh, didn't know that. So, you can imagine Rocco getting involved in this GSV thing without your having been super involved in it too. It's the kind of thing that fit into his own journeys and all that stuff. There wasn't a tension with y'all over this.
Oh no!
All this work and
no,
everything.
No.
Okay.
No, never a tension. His only tension with it all is, I think both of us are not people who need the limelight or want to be in front of the group.
Mhm.
And he definitely shied away from that.
Mhm.
But he had so much to offer that it propelled him into that position at times. But he was at odds with that because he was far more personal and far more, his energy was much more private than.
Mhm. Mm. Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions I want to ask about GSV, but I wondered if there was something about your journey with GSV that you thought we might cover or talk about and that we haven't, so that you can talk about it now. I mean, just anything that you wondered why I didn't ask you. I have some other questions, but they're not specifically about the organization. Do you think it's still necessary? I mean, do you hope that it continues, or are you fine if it's stops and has done its job and everybody's graduated? or how do you feel about the future of it? Or do you have an opinion about hoping or not hoping?
At this point in my life, I don't see that things have to last forever to have been significant things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the answer to that. And I think it seems to be fulfilling a need, and it's continuing to do that. But I also think that it's, if it continues to bring people in, it'll probably need to continue to evolve substantially. From what I understand, a lot of people connected are my age and your age,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not a whole lot of new life.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it is more significant for people of this generation than it is for younger men. Not that the profound unconditional love that can be offered in a group that somehow centers on it this way wouldn't be helpful to anyone, but maybe they need to figure out how they do it now.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is different.
Yeah. Do you remember ever coming across either a student or just somebody else in your life that you sort of felt would benefit from GSV and they ended up going there and that was true? Or did you ever urge anybody to?
Yes, I'm pretty sure there's several people in that category, but I don't have names right now.
Okay, that's okay. I just wondered if that, if you were glad it was there for them.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we have a list of all of the people who've died.
I read it.
And the reason we put that there is because we can't interview them, and so we can't talk to them about GSV. And what we're hoping to do, and what has been sort of happening, is that if you go down the list, if you have the strength to, and talk about what you remember about that person, either their personality or an incident, an interaction you had with them, any kind of memory associated with this person's name, then we can get a sense over time by interviewing a lot of people who have comments about that person, so that their existence in this organization won't be totally lost. So that's what we're trying to get at is, what was this person like, or what do you remember about that person, or so if you could do that, just start at the top or start at the bottom and work your way through, free associate if you know some of those people, and you won't remember them all or know them all.
Right.
But I don't know all of those people, but I've heard about them from some of the people we've interviewed, and they've been wonderful memories to have recorded. So the whole point of these interviews is to try to capture the emotional content of the organization, in addition to all the flyers and the speeches and the archival stuff that we have. So that's been one of the most wonderful parts of this, and that's what I'd like for you to attempt. Okay. So,
Well,
do you want to take a break first, or do you want to
Yes.
just do that? Okay.
I know some of them quite well.
Okay, well, this could take a while now. Should we stay broken or start up now?
I'm not going to talk about most of these people. I'm just. Oh well, I guess I should mention some.
And let's leave Rocco to the end. Okay? And tell me about these other people. I'm hoping to hear some stories about folks I don't know, because a lot of people won't know these people. When you're ready, yeah.
Okay. Jerry Barfield was an incredibly handsome man who came to the Running Water gatherings from Atlanta, and a really sweet person. I don't have any real stories to tell about him.
Red hair.
Gary Briggs was a married fellow with children who lived in Durham when we had the beginning gatherings, and I think he was to the very first one. He was a slow-speaking, deliberate person.
Older?
I think was my age.
Oh, okay.
And he, maybe a few years older. And he, then he moved from Durham to the west somewhere, I think New Mexico, and was there for a long time. And then he moved back this direction and bought a house in Jupiter down the road from here.
Mhm.
And then when he came back, we reconnected. It was good to see him again. And he was a hiking buddy of Rocco's. They would go hiking quite a bit. He had a few health issues, but he was in basically really good shape even till he died.
Hmm.
And he died of a flu that was going around.
Oh.
James Broughton I mentioned, and I really don't know him well, but I was so impressed by him. And John Burnside, who was Harry Hayes' partner, was very talkative. It was a shorter, very sweet man, always making sure everybody's needs were met. But the amount he would talk would drive Rocco crazy.
Probably Harry too.
Harry wasn't quite as verbose as John.
Yeah.
Harry Hay. I guess. He was a legend, and I think he enjoyed it.
Yes.
In his life.
I know what you mean.
And I remember when he was here, one evening I invited David Hopes and others to come for a dinner right before that first conference.
Yeah.
And we had a huge crowd in there around the table there and all. and they were talking to him, to Harry, and he would nod off during conversations. he was already up there, and this was already, a lot for him.
Oh my goodness.
Martin Iskanitis was a character right from the start. He was at the very first gathering, at the conference.
I didn't know that.
I'm quite sure.
Okay.
And a star in the sense.
And as you're going through the list, if you remembered a particular interaction with somebody you've already mentioned, just go back to them, because memory's weird. It doesn't come when we want it to all the time.
Right.
So
I remember John Mungo, also very handsome man, in Atlanta. I remember being at planning meetings where he was, or smaller groups where we were doing the conference.
Mm-hmm. Was he an older person too?
No, he
No?
was younger.
Young guy?
Yeah, very handsome. And then Raymond, into lighting. Raymond was very sweet man, actually. And he was here at this house once too, I remember.
You remember why?
It might have been at the time of Sweat Lodge.
Mm-hmm.
Cassandra, was amazingly artistic and smart, and not happy. And it broke your heart, and you never knew how to quite make him happy, or what was exactly wrong. And he was at the first conferences when we had small groups, and he always ended up in my small group. And it was always difficult because he would say something that would make somebody else in the group feel threatened, and there was always like, oh, how are we going to handle this? But my heart always went out to Cassandra because I could see how much pain there was behind what was going on with him. And for some reason, he would respect me in a way that I never knew exactly why, but he would do his best to cooperate. So I really appreciated where he was coming from and how difficult his life was for him. He lived in Asheville for a while, and I would see him at the gym I went to occasionally and talk with him. And at one point he got himself in trouble by writing political opinions that felt like he was threatening somebody in authority, and he ended up actually going to jail. And I remember trying to write a letter to support him to prevent that from happening, but it happened anyway. In jail, they took away all of the medications he was relying on, and he ended up coming out of jail like a changed person. He was happier. In jail, he had taken on the role of teaching less educated inmates English and expression and writing or something, and he had found some purpose that he was pleased with. I was blown away about how changed he was. But then he went back to his old lifestyle and he reverted back to exactly how miserable he was before. Modern life did not serve him, and he couldn't find his way out of it on his own. But at the conferences, he would read his poetry, and he would come alive because this sardonic, ironic wit that was expressed there in his misanthropic delivery was just extraordinary. And he could bring down the house and then he would giggle a little himself when he saw what was happening. It was just incredible. I knew Crazy out, but not well, and he came to gatherings at Running Water in the early stages, in early times. He got the name, I suppose, because he would give advice that sometimes was extraordinarily on and other times way out there, so you never know. John Stowe was active from the beginning. He came to gatherings. He had a name, Yarrow. That was his name back when he came to the Running Water gatherings, which was appropriate because he was like into herbs and everything. And he was always into massage and movement and always a dynamic person. And as the GSB progressed, he would always be doing movement and workshops that got you into moving and your own personal kinesthetic creativity. Amazing that way. He was very good. When he died of a heart attack, I think it was like amazing. That should happen to somebody like that.
I'm so young. You were a small group leader more than once, probably.
Yes.
And do you have any particular memories of doing that, either for the first time, or it probably wasn't the first time you'd ever led a small group in your life or anything, but what's your take on the small group things? Did amazing things happen in them?
I
Were
felt
they hard
that,
to do?
No, I didn't feel they were hard to do. I don't know if I always did the program. They were hard to do.
What's the program?
And I think for me, the small group was not about me leading it as much as allowing the men to come forth and be themselves and share what they had to share and try to keep things that might get in the way of that out of the way, or in check that would be difficult from some personalities. But they were in general, they flowed well, and I think they were helpful because it enabled an intimate sharing that was harder to do in a huge heart circle, especially if you're not the limelight sort of person who wants to actually be on stage. And so I think that helped. I remember I had in the early days Andrew Raymer in my small group once, and that was kind of neat, just seeing Andrew in this other aspect of just a sharing participant in the group.
Do you remember anybody in particular from all those small groups you did who you were particularly fond of, or had any particular memory about, or do they all smoosh together?
Well, I have a hard time remembering facts and figures and dates and people and places, but I do know that David Salyer, who is so wonderful, so dynamic and sharing in his own way, was in my small group, I think, in his first conference.
Uh-huh.
Was a nice connection.
Mhm.
I think there were others. I feel that that kind of guidance is sort of natural, but not extraordinary to remember.
Uh-huh. Okay. Before you go to the next person, there's another question. I was wondering if you met anybody through a conference who is still in your life that wasn't there before you went to one. Did you bond with anybody at a conference that is an important relationship to you now or was for a while? That you didn't meet them in Asheville, that's where you stumbled over them. Or maybe they lived in Asheville and you didn't know that till you...
Well, certainly Bob Strain, who went by Andromeda in the early years, is now a wonderful friend in Asheville, and he lived in West Virginia at that time, and would occasionally stop on his way back to West Virginia here from the conference. So having him close by now and his wonderful energy, totally beautiful energy, is really nice. And Chaser, the same, Chase Robinson, who is now here and in the group in Asheville.
Mm-hmm.
And
did anybody you met at the conference who you wished were local move away somewhere? Some people have gone to Denver or Boulder or whatever.
right,
To,
yeah. Some of those men from the early conference, whom I really can't even remember all their names, but were extraordinary people, did move out of the area. And there was a group from Charlotte, including Larry Jackson, that were really wonderful. And I remember Greg Aiello, who still goes to conferences from Florida, who I had a connection with and has visited here, because he used to love to hike the area after the conferences.
okay.
King Thaxton is a real contributor to this whole movement and phenomena, I feel. He was a connection, actually, Rocco made, I think, at the Baths in Atlanta, and came to Running Water, and just fit right in. And we were doing RFD, the very first one, and he made the cover for the first RFD that was produced from Running Water.
Didn't know that.
Oh, you have to have this in your collection.
Well, I probably do, but I didn't know he had ever done one.
Yes, it is a picture, it's black, and it's a picture of the planet as if running water were the Earth. And it has it on there. The name of that RFD was Rhododendron Fire District, because that's what the signs say as you approach running water, because that's the area it is. And so he did this black and white graphic that was extraordinary. And it was very auspicious, because it was like just the perfect thing at the time. And his contributions throughout how the conferences went and the involvements he had were always extraordinary. Involved in many of the brochures and in the incredible labyrinth he did at one of the conferences on the badminton field, which was a labyrinth in which he used Christmas lights buried in like pine needles to trace the path, and it was so magical lit up at night. I think King was an artist who gave extraordinarily to this group. I think Bill Meneely was an adorable man who had a wonderful energy right from the start. Too bad he didn't live longer. He would have had a sure.
What did he look like?
He was short, dark-haired, perfectly built, and I think he actually, like labored for a living.
He was a librarian.
He was?
Yeah. He took his place at the Quaker Library when he died. Sort of just to honor him in sort of a way. Blue eyes. Hard to look away from them.
Right.
Okay. That's all you can do. Okay. All right. So, did you want to show us some pictures?
Yes.
Okay. So what is this assemblage? Was this for the service?
Yeah, I put together these and others for the memorial I had for Rocco here on this property. And these two pictures right here were the two pictures Rocco sent me when we were writing to each other before I met him. And these were the pictures I sent him when we were corresponding from the ad.
Okay.
So this is only what we knew of each other. And this is a picture of me at that time when we met on Lake Ronkonkoma where I lived, and this is Rocco in front of Lake Ronkonkoma there. And when we set out to explore the country, we were in a pickup truck and we camped out everywhere we went. That's what it looked like. And this is at our house on Lake Ronkonkoma. That's Ernie Lockwood, who ended up having the place in Tampa, Mother Lockwood. And this is John Jones, who was the fourth person to buy. He visited there on Long Island. And this is me and John at the Sunken Forest on Fire Island, which was just south of where I lived in Long Island.
Okay.
And we learned beekeeping on Long Island. This was the beekeeper we learned it from. There's Rocco and me learning how to extract honey. And Rocco, when we moved to Asheville, was the produce manager in one of the first natural food stores here. And there's doing produce. I made him take dance lessons so he would dance with me once.
Oh yeah.
And here we are. Here's us with friends. Here's us with Michael Mason, who was an incredible poet and came to Running Water. This is when we arrived in Asheville and I was working at Highland Hospital. I was sitting in front of our house in Montfort.
I don't recognize you, Peter.
This is me.
Now, I didn't ask you what I meant to ask you when you did this Mother Earth News thing. What was it? How did you get to be receptive to the Mother Earth Newsy types of living? I mean, how did you, from your family background, where did you enter the alternate lifestyle fantasy dream that you was it about being gay and knowing that was not what you wanted, or was it
I don't know.
Did you have mentors or
no,
taught you these things?
I just
Did you
ordered
read
that.
it in books? How did you find out that there was another way to be an American besides, living on Long Island forever?
I don't know. I just subscribed to this magazine out of the blue, and it just appealed to me. So.
Okay. Okay. So you before the Est stuff, were there other movements that you plugged into, or was it the age that you were at college and this was in the air, or what? How did you get pointed in this direction? Were you born this way? Did you come out of the womb wanting to live on the land and make your own house and all of that? How did that?
My father was very much a do-it-yourselfer, so handling your own life was part of what we did.
Okay. Well, that would be a big influence, I guess.
Now, that's okay.
How about we put them right against the wall there? I'm still getting some glare.
Oh, you are.
Yeah,
Right this way?
yeah, that might. Let's turn off that light right there. Can we turn that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be a little.
These are pictures of basically our life after we settled here in this house. This is the original picture of this house, which it sort of doesn't look like now.
No.
And us in the kitchen as it looked when we first moved here. And Rocco with the dog he had at that time. He really wanted this dog, which he trained incredibly well. Its name was Kiva. And us helping a friend get wood in at one time. This is a picture of us, Ron and Rocky and I, at GSB gathering. And this is Rocco and I at my brother's wedding, my younger brother. Here's Rocco at a GSB conference with Andrew Lander. This was one of the early gay parades, pride parades in Asheville. Or it might have even been in Durham. We would travel the state a little bit to go to them. Us on the swing here. We've had that porch painted a long time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well.
This is Rocco and a little later. And that's more later.
Is that he near? Where was that picture taken? It looks kind of tropical.
I think it's in the yard somewhere here.
Okay. Tropical Mars Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that. And the pictures behind you, which I don't think I can move if you could turn around, they're big anyway.
Can you do that?
Just let me finish with this.
Yeah. Professional photographer who is Mark's friend came to visit us once, and she took a sequence of pictures of Rocco, and this is one blown up. She managed to catch his incredible beauty, and so I've loved it. And friends blew this up for me for the memorial, and they blew this one up too that she took.
Love that. She took them here.
Yes.
Yeah. And what is this?
And this is a picture that Banyan took of Rocco, and then he had some words put across the front of it. Banyan had a crush on Rocco.
And who's Banyan?
Banyan is one of the more recent GSV community.
Okay. Okay. Well, it would be easy to have a crush on.